I was arrested in front of my co-workers at the museum I'd worked at for nearly a decade. The charges were serious, federal even. Fraud, embezzlement, a full investigation, and somehow everything pointed to me. And the person who reported me, my husband, Garrett Winslow, the man who once told me I was his piece, the man who knew my schedule, my passwords, my routines. He knew exactly how to build a case against me, and for a while it worked. But what he didn't know was that I don't fall apart, I don't panic, I plan. And when the moment came, I placed a single envelope on the courtroom table. That envelope changed everything. You're listening to this story from where, on your commute, before bed, or maybe in the middle of a quiet afternoon. Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear how it all unfolds. Elena McRae had always lived by structure. She was the director of program development at the Colorado Museum of History, a job that required precision patience and absolute trust. She coordinated exhibitions, handled donations, and curated every detail of the museum's public face. Every item had its place. Every contract, every artifact, every name in the ledger had to align. And for years, everything did. Her life with Garrett felt just as carefully arranged. They lived in a craftsman-style house in Capitol Hill, filled with restored clocks, hardwood floors, and shelves lined with books on American folklore. Garrett, a specialist in antique timepieces, ran a small workshop out of their detached garage. He was soft-spoken, deliberate, and had a way of making people feel calm in his presence. That calm was one of the reasons Elena had fallen for him. To friends and colleagues, they seemed like the perfect pair, quietly successful, deeply in sync, and entirely unremarkable in all the ways that suggested stability. But things had started shifting. It wasn't dramatic at first. Garrett missed a donor gala he had helped plan. Then he forgot their anniversary, something he'd never done before. Elena noticed small inconsistencies in their shared non-profit foundation's financial reports. Minor things, easily explained. At least that's what she told herself. Until the federal agents came with a search warrant, froze her accounts, and escorted her out of the museum in handcuffs. And Garrett, he wasn't there. He was the one who tipped them off. And that was the moment Elena realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. The days following Elena's arrest moved like a blur, lawyers' paperwork questions she didn't know how to answer. She was placed on administrative leave from the museum. Her name appeared in local headlines, often alongside words like fraud, misappropriation, and abuse of public funds. Strangers online speculated, dissected her photos, her statements, even her posture in courtroom sketches. Garrett, meanwhile, stayed quiet. He didn't show up at the arraignment. He didn't visit. He didn't even call. But his name was all over the case file. The original complaint came from him. The files, the flagged transactions, the private emails printed and highlighted, they had all been submitted through his legal counsel. Elena sat alone in the apartment they used to share, staring at the shelves Garrett built by hand. She scrolled through text messages, searching for signs she had missed, some clue, some shift that should have told her what he was planning. There were none. What she found instead were files on her home computer that she didn't remember opening. Password changes she didn't authorize. Grant applications tied to projects she never touched. All of it pointed to a single, terrifying thought: she was being framed. Not just accused, constructed. Whoever did this, whoever went to such lengths to rewrite her life, knew her intimately, knew how she worked, how she filed things, how she'd react. This wasn't a random attack. This was personal. Her lawyer, Madeline Hart, was sharp and direct. "They're building a solid case," she said one afternoon. "The financial trail is deliberate, it's thorough, and every road leads back to you. Unless we can prove someone forged your name, spoofed your access, or manipulated those records, this won't go away easily." "But I didn't do any of it," Elena whispered. Madeline looked her in the eye. "Then we have to find the person who did." That night, Elena called someone she hadn't spoken to in nearly 5 years. Travis Dane, a former friend, a quiet genius, and more importantly, a digital forensics expert. Travis Dane lived alone on the edge of Aurora, in a cluttered mid-century house, filled with old-tech half-disassembled servers and walls scribbled with whiteboard markers. He answered the door barefoot, wearing a hoodie from a cybersecurity conference and a pair of mismatched socks. He didn't ask why she had come. He just moved aside and said, "You want tea?" They sat in his kitchen where a soldering iron shared space with a stack of unopened mail. "You think Garrett framed you?" Travis said not as a question but as a statement. Elena hesitated. "I think there are things in my system that I didn't put there. Transactions I never made, documents I never signed, and the timing, it's too perfect." Travis nodded slowly. "Send me everything. Drive images, cloud backups, any shared credentials you remember. No details are too small." Within 24 hours, he had a portable drive filled with mirrored data from her museum computer, her personal laptop, and even her tablet. He dug through metadata file histories, background processes, every trace of digital activity that most people never notice. And by the third day he found it. A remote login to her museum account from a device registered to a Garrett Winslow. The timestamp matched a weekend she had been in Santa Fe for a museum leadership retreat. There were document edits, routing number changes, and PDF signature stamps, all mimicking her style, using her templates, but executed from a machine that wasn't hers. He traced the access further to a VPN exit node in Amsterdam, designed to obscure identity. But Travis knew better. Amateurs use VPNs and think that's the end of the trail, he said, showing her the data. "But your boy didn't realize that your home Wi-Fi had passive logging enabled." His laptop MAC address. It pinged during the same hours as the Amsterdam access. "He was doing this from your own guest room." Elena's stomach turned. She remembered that weekend Garrett had insisted on staying behind to catch up on workshop orders. He'd offered to water her plants, forward her mail, even texted her daily updates about the dog. "Garrett forged your access," Travis said flatly. "He ghostwrote the emails, the grant letters, the account links, everything that made the FBI think it was you." Elena stared at the screen, numb. "Why would he do that?" Travis didn't answer, but the deeper they dug, the more deliberate it became. He hadn't just set her up. He'd built a timeline, a false trail of decisions forms and financial approvals that appeared gradual and intentional. No one would believe she had been framed unless they saw the invisible thread behind it. And even then, it might not be enough. But Elena wasn't finished. If Garrett wanted a perfect crime, she would give him the one thing he hadn't accounted for: her silence. And her strategy. Elena didn't sleep much that week. She stopped checking the news, stopped reading the comments, stopped waiting for Garrett to contact her. She knew now that he wouldn't. His silence wasn't guilt. It was calculation. And if he'd spent months building a false narrative, then she'd spend the next few weeks dismantling it piece by piece. Travis became her shadow. Every day after work, he'd meet her in the back corner of a quiet library or at the co-working space of a friend who owed him a favor. He taught her how to scrub metadata, how to trace IP packet paths, how to use forensic software that left no footprint. It wasn't just about proving her innocence anymore. It was about making sure what they found could stand up in court. The more they uncovered, the clearer Garrett's plan became. He hadn't just framed her to avoid legal consequences, he'd profited. A series of private account transfers led to a hidden wallet under an alias tied to antique exports. There were quiet transactions with collectors overseas, all tied to artifacts that had recently gone missing from the museum's internal archive. It wasn't about money alone. It was about erasing his trail and using her as the cover. Elena knew the courts wouldn't accept digital evidence alone. Garrett was too good at masking his involvement. So she started building something more tangible. She reached out to former colleagues who remembered projects she never worked on, but had somehow signed off. She requested records of her physical badge scans. She asked Travis to restore deleted text messages from her old phone, one Garrett had replaced for her months ago under the guise of an upgrade. And then she got an idea. At first, Madeline thought she was joking. "You want to let them think you're not fighting back?" her lawyer asked. "I want Garrett to believe I've given up, that I'm negotiating a plea deal." "That I'm scared," Elena replied. Madeline raised an eyebrow. And then, Elena held her gaze. "Then we timed the drop." Together they crafted a strategy. Elena would cooperate on paper. She would remain quiet, make no public statement, and feign emotional fatigue. Meanwhile, Madeline would request access to court filings Garrett's legal team submitted claiming procedural fairness. It gave them insight into his final narrative, the version of her he was locking in for the record. Travis worked silently behind the scenes. Every file they touched, every image, every bit of recovered code was compiled into a single, tightly structured packet. Not too soon, not too late. When it was ready, Elena sealed it in a plain white envelope and waited. The courtroom was colder than Elena expected. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the eyes. People watched her with quiet judgment. Some pitied her. Most didn't. After all, the case looked airtight. A respected institution accused of financial misconduct. Dozens of documents traced back to her. And a husband who had stepped forward seemingly torn to do the right thing. Garrett sat 2 rows behind the prosecution. His suit was charcoal, his posture confident. He didn't look at her. "Not once!" Madeline leaned in. "He thinks this is over." Elena nodded. "Let him." The hearing opened with a review of the evidence. Emails allegedly written by Elena Wire, transfers she approved, grant funds that vanished under her watch. The federal prosecutor read through each item like a checklist, painting her as someone who had misused public trust for personal gain. Madeline didn't interrupt. She let them build the picture, frame by frame, word by word. Then came the moment. "Your Honor," Madeline said as the prosecutor finished his opening statement, "the defense would like to submit supplemental material for the court's review." She handed a white envelope to the bailiff. It was unmarked, plain silent. The judge opened it. Inside was a USB drive and a printed executive summary. He read silently. His brows tightened. The courtroom shifted. After a pause, he looked directly at the prosecution. "I'd like both parties to approach the bench." For the next 10 minutes, murmurs filled the room as the judge spoke in hushed tones with the attorneys. Garrett craned his neck. For the first time, uncertainty touched his expression. Then the judge spoke aloud. "This hearing is adjourned until further review of new material can be completed. In the meantime, I am ordering a temporary suspension of all financial restrictions placed on Ms. McCrae, effective immediately." A stunned silence followed. Garrett stood halfway, as if to protest, but stopped. Elena didn't look at him. She didn't need to. As she walked out of the courtroom, she could feel the weight shift. A current turning. Something subtle but irreversible. The envelope had done its job, but it wasn't over. Not yet. 3 days after the hearing, Garrett was called in for a follow-up interview with federal investigators. He didn't seem concerned. According to reports, he walked in without legal counsel, claiming he had nothing to hide. He brought copies of the same documents he'd submitted in court, unaware that they were already being dissected line by line, timestamp by timestamp. But what Garrett didn't know was that the envelope hadn't just contained financial metadata. It had included recovered keylogger logs, VPN usage overlaps, Wi-Fi ping, data digital access forensics, all pointing directly to his home device. And that wasn't all. Travis had uncovered something deeper, a ledger buried within encrypted folders on Garrett's external drive containing lists of artifacts, private sale amounts, buyer aliases, and transfer schedules. Items that were never officially logged as missing, but had quietly vanished from the museum's internal records over the past year. Garrett wasn't just framing Elena. He had been using her credentials to steal from the museum's protected archive and funnel artifacts into the black market. And Elena's arrest. It was the final step in his plan, cutting ties, erasing suspicion, and walking away clean. Only this time he miscalculated. When agents showed him the compiled data, he denied everything, claimed the laptop had been compromised, accused Elena of planting evidence. But they were already ahead of him. The final piece was waiting in a climate-controlled storage unit in Aurora, a location rented under Garrett's alias, but tied to his credit card history. Inside was a shipping crate containing 3 19th-century Native American ceremonial artifacts, listed as in preservation under Elena's programs. They were never meant to leave museum property. The crate was the smoking gun. Garrett was arrested the next morning in his workshop while he was calibrating a French carriage clock. The press had a field day. "Horologist turned thief," one headline read. "Elena McCrae vindicated," said another. She didn't give interviews. She didn't go on talk shows. She went back to work. The museum board issued a formal apology. Her accounts were restored. Her reputation piece by piece returned to her. But something inside had changed. Elena no longer moved through life assuming people meant well. She moved through it, watching the details like she always had, but now with the quiet understanding that trust is a fragile thing. Garrett was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and trafficking of protected cultural property. Elena attended the sentencing, but didn't stay long. She left the courtroom before the handcuffs clicked. Outside snow had begun to fall. She pulled her coat tight and kept walking past the cameras, past the microphones, past the noise. She didn't need a spotlight. She had the truth, and that was enough.